Hello everybody, this is Sutek94, and I feel it is time for me to dive back into what I consider the Wild West era of trading card games. By that, I mean I'm taking a look at a game that hails from the very beginning of the market's existence, which I define as the period from 1993 to 1995. I did a video on another game from that era, Galactic Empires, which I imagine at least a few people might have heard of when it was new. I say that because the game I'm going to be talking about today seems to be way more obscure than Galactic Empires. Of course, I can't talk about any other TCG from that era without mentioning the Big Daddy itself, Magic the Gathering. As everybody knows, when Magic was released in the summer of 1993, the floodgates flew open with regards to the TCG market, and this led to a bunch of people trying to grab some easy money by making their own. Enter this guy, Mark Miller. Mark Miller is a well-regarded designer of role-playing and war games like Traveller and Triplanetary, and he was one of the founders of the Game Designers Workshop. After winning about 18 trillion awards for his works, Miller left the workshop in 1991 and proceeded to make a video game, Challenge of the Five Realms, released in 1992. Flash forward to 1994, when presumably Miller saw the new hot market that games like Magic and Spellfire were carving, so he decided to make one himself. The result was Super Deck, billed as the superhero trading card game. The publisher, Card Sharks Incorporated, or CSI, didn't last long to say the least. As far as I can tell, Super Deck and its lone expansion, if it can even be counted as such, Slim Decks, released during the following year, were their only products. I should mention that this game is widely regarded as being terrible. Absolutely terrible. How bad could it possibly be with a man like Mark Miller designing it? Well, let's start with the cards themselves, specifically the artwork. You can definitely tell what the artists were going for here. Comic book style pieces with some pretty interesting credits. You'll see names like Josh Neufeld, Dean Haspiel, Brian Bendis, and Phil Hester among the artists here. Unfortunately, the end results aren't great, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is Sutek's underestimation of the week. Seriously though, this art is bad, and it really falls flat, more like falls so hard it winds up digging a hole to the core of the earth, compared to other TCG artwork of the era. Don't get me wrong, TCG artwork was all over the place in those days, but even the goofiest artwork from other games, yup, even the 12-year-old Crayola Factory Thieves and Stock Photo Library Raiders that did some of Galactic Empires' early art, are very much superior to the art featured here. By comparison, Super Deck's artwork looks very dull and bland for the most part, and it doesn't help that the colors tend to bleed. It also doesn't help that the cards themselves look flat. The layout here is not great. The name is located towards the middle instead of the top. I don't think that's a big problem, considering you really only need to be looking at the number printed on the card. And by number, I mean the one that's awkwardly floating around within the artwork. While the stock used here is not the worst I've seen, compare these to Magic or even those early Galactic Empires cards that felt more like bicycle playing cards, and you'll feel how cheap Super Deck is in comparison. Said cheapness continues with the print quality of the cards. I'm going to be using GE cards for this comparison because both use a similar, if not the same font for the rules and flavor texts. Note how bold the text looks on Super Deck cards. I've noticed this boldness is inconsistent, sometimes varying wildly. That combined with the flatness, the not great artwork, and the even less than great cardstock, you can tell that these people didn't have a lot of money. Also, have you ever seen a card where the artwork is literally trying to prevent you from reading the flavor text? I know what that's supposed to say, but that effect is just no. Going through my collection and looking at whatever scans of cards are available online, I've also noted a number of typos and errors that will doubtless get the grammar Nazis triggered. At least I haven't seen any serious misprints, like miscuts and such. This is one of the few card games I know of that has no rarity system at all. By that, I mean I'm sure there are other games that do this, but it does make Super Deck stand out a bit from other games of the period. I'm also certain that these 60 card packs were the only way you could get Super Deck cards. At least I'm pretty sure that no booster packs were made, as I have never seen one. In total, Super Deck has 160 different cards, though I have noticed a few repeats with different artwork. The Slim Decks expansion, again using that word loosely, was sold in 30 card packs, thus the name, I suppose. I don't have anything with regards to the total number of unique cards here, but I can tell you that A, Slim Decks cards will have a 1995 copyright date on them, and B, there are some reprints from the base sets. In case you're wondering if CSI got the rights to use actual superheroes and villains in this game, the answer would be yes, but none you'd recognize unless you knew about them already. And by that I mean, no, you're not going to see Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, and etc. within this set. The obscure superhero Mr. Fix-It, you have to say it that way, his name is 2 T's, is one such example. Originally seen in a series of comics, and by series I mean exactly 2 issues, released between 1989 and 1990 by Apple Comics, and a single issue in 1993 by Heroic Publishing. I wonder if Super Deck was this guy's last gasp. The rules are, well, I'll try to explain them the best I can. You and an opponent each have a deck with at least 40 cards with the same 4 of rule as Magic, and both players begin with a hand of 7 cards. Both control a hero and a villain, the hero to their left and the villain to their right, laid out as if these heroes and villains were doing battle. Thus, there are 2 battles going on at once, though you don't start the game with a hero and villain in play, and I'll tell you why that isn't good in a bit. These hero and villain cards have a number at the top left, which shows how many points they start with. In order to win, both your hero and villain must have at least 10 points higher than your opponents, and you boost them by playing cards, only 1 play per turn, that utilize the most basic of maths, namely addition, subtraction, and multiplication, to change that number on the top left. Of course, there are cards that cancel out other cards or force your opponent to discard cards. At the end of your turn, you draw a card. You can also spend your turn discarding any number of cards from your hand and drawing that same amount back. Thus, you have a hand of 7 cards, almost always. Some cards have an H or a V on them, which signifies that they can only be played on either a hero or villain stack, respectively. As far as different card types, there's obviously the hero and villain cards. These have type base on them, as they're meant to be used to start a hero or villain stack. Cards of types plus, minus, and times do exactly what you think they do. Plus and times cards can be played on anything, it seems, with plus cards adding its value to base cards, and times cards multiplying the stack's value by its own value. Times cards also have a theme, I've noticed, superpowers for your superhero or villain, which is strange. You'd think these people would start off with some superpowers that have actual relevance to the game, but anyways, they can only be played on a stack if a plus card has been played on it already. You can only have 1 plus and times card on a stack, and they have to be in a specific order, base, plus, then times, though you can replace these with another plus or times card, discarding the old one and any cards that might have been played on these. Minus cards can only be played on an opponent's stack, and they don't affect base cards, only plus cards. You can't go below 0 on any plus card's value, and you can only have 1 minus card in play on a stack at once. Peril cards are exactly the same, only these affect times cards, canceling them out entirely, instead of plus cards. Special cards, and I quote directly from the rules, contains specific rules which somehow apply to the game. In other words, think of these like sorceries in Magic. As far as companion cards and companion stacks, I'll explain more about those later because I would consider it one of the more complicated mechanics featured here. Finally, we have location cards, which are plus cards, but they are played separately from a hero or villain stack. Only one can be played on a battle at a time, and its value is added to all stacks on your side of the table within that battle. You can replace it with another location card, or your opponent can play their own location card which, as you might expect, forces you to discard yours if you've played one. There's also an ante mechanic where each time an opponent plays a villain card or villain companion card, You have to set aside the top card in your deck in a separate hostage pile, and whoever wins the game wins all the hostages on both sides of the table. While this is different from how Ante worked in Magic, it's also one of the worst examples of such a mechanic in any card game. Thankfully, it is optional, though the rules pamphlet doesn't explicitly say this. What is a good thing, though, is that the events happening within one battle do not spill over to the other battle. Scoring in the game works as follows. You take the value of the base card, you add it to the plus card and any minus card played on it, then multiply it by the times card if no peril cards are played on it. Locations add to this value, as well as the value of any companion stacks, but these companions don't contribute to the value of the main stack. And now, here comes the best part about this game. The moment both your stacks have at least 10 points higher than your opponent's stacks, you have to say, "Last chance." Seriously, that's in the rules. And your opponent gets one more turn to do something to erase their deficit on either battle. If they can't come up with anything, you win the game. That doesn't sound too bad, right? Well, that's only the surface. When we start digging below said surface, cracks start showing up, and you quickly find out you've entered a hollow shell of a product. So the cards look horrible, the rules are a thing that exists, and then I actually sat down and played a few games of Super Deck. That's when I started seeing it fall apart big time. In my first game, me and my quote-unquote opponent played with the two decks I had bought with no changes to either deck. I say quote-unquote opponent because I was trying to play two players at once. Let's face it, I'm likely never going to get another actual real-life person to play this with me, but anyways, my opponent had some bad draws. Even after spending some turns discarding and drawing, he could not get a villain in play opposite his hero, Starflare, who had a value of 3. Meanwhile, on my side of the table, I couldn't get a hero into play, but I eventually had my villain, Electro, with value 9, boosted by a giant dirigible with plus 7. So, what do the rules say about a situation where there's only one battle on the table, and one side's stack is valued way higher than the opposing stack? 16-3 for the record. Nothing. You have to have two battles going at once. So the game continued, and I boosted Electro even further by giving him weather control with ×5. I was completely thrashing poor Starflare. Finally, my opponent played a magic spell on my weather control, completely cancelling it out. Eventually, Starflare gained a secret identity with +5. I replaced the nullified weather control with Teleport, a ×9 card, and still we could not get a second battle going. Finally, my opponent played his main villain, Hitman, who, like Starflare, has a value of 3. What, he doesn't have a value of 47? Obvious jokes aside, I still could not play a hero of my own to fight Hitman. At one point, Electro's value was at 146 compared to Starflare's 4, all while Hitman was winning by virtue of not fighting anybody. Many minutes later, we found that the game was getting truly ridiculous. Finally, at what seemed like the game's 12,000th turn, I played my hero, Vector, with a value of 4, 1 point higher than Hitman. Eventually, everybody met up at the Sears Tower. No, really, the Sears Tower with +1 was in play on both battles. And, despite Hitman trying to hide in his secret base with +3 in the end, the scores ultimately wound up being like this. In the Vector vs. Hitman battle, 17-6, and in Electro vs. Starflare, 45-5. After one final last chance, my opponent decided to concede even though he had a time triangle, which cancels any card on your opponent's side of the board, regardless of battle. I should point out that the back of the boxes advertise a playing time of 5 to 30 minutes. This game felt more like 45, if only because both of us just couldn't get good draws. I tried reading the rules again, seeing if there was anything saying that both players started the game with a hero and villain in play, but nothing to be found. I did notice this little blurb though. Within a stack, assuming your opponent has placed no cards on it, The score is the base card plus the times card, and that total is multiplied by the times card. Yeah, these rules can't be trusted. I'm sure it was a typo. They meant to say plus the plus card or something to that effect. But that, combined with the other noted typos I mentioned earlier, results in this vibe that Super Deck was rushed out the door quickly to try to grab some of that dosh that Magic was making. There are playtester credits listed in the rules pamphlet, which makes you wonder, how much time was spent on playtesting this game? It doesn't seem like much. Oh, there's also this in the rules pamphlet. Play your first game through to familiarize yourselves with the rules, and then start playing the game in earnest. I'll be sure to do that? Question mark? Here are some other things I've noted about this game. For starters, what is the advantage of playing a hero or villain with a value of 1 over one with a value of 9? I'll give you one guess, and if that guess was absolutely nothing, you would be correct. In fact, it's somewhat of a disadvantage. I mentioned companion cards earlier, and as the rules say, you cannot have a companion or companion stack that has a higher value than your main hero or villain stack. Thus, if you play a hero or villain with a value of 1 to start off with, you've effectively limited yourself to playing with companions that have a value of 1 until you can boost your main stack. And you'd probably be focusing on doing that in any case. Oh, and some companion cards, these are labeled as partner and sidekick cards, allow you to begin a new stack with a new base, plus, and times card, again in that order. All this seems pointless to my mind. I'd also have to say that good deck building and actual strategy are almost non-existent here. Sure, it's possible to fill a deck entirely with cards that have a value of 8 or 9 and have a decent amount of base cards, again, heroes and villains, to play. But unless you make up your own rules, you're still stuck playing what is, at its core, a not very good game. As I've mentioned, heroes and villains with less than, let's say, 8 points are pretty much unplayable. There is no drawback to playing a base card with a value of 8 or 9. There are no cards that specifically target base cards, at all actually, let alone those with higher values. And probably the most important thing to remember here, there is no cost to play any card in the entire set. And, as I've told you, you can have a hero or villain absent from your side of the table for a very long time and still wind up winning the game, because your opponent's draws or deck isn't very good. Actually, I wonder what it would be like to play this game with decks composed of cards entirely of values 8 or 9. Some cards found in this game that'll make you say, "What the everlasting butt of Celestia," includes a card that makes your opponent skip their turn. But considering you can only play one card per turn, you've effectively skipped your turn as well. There's also a card that showcases how old this game is. A very confusing card that literally causes your last turn to be replayed and has a clause that states the same cards may be played. And no, there is no errata for this card in the rules. Times cards that have values of 1, and a card that's literally just a multiplication table. I guess if you didn't know how to math, that would come in handy, but in every other case, getting that in a pack of Super Deck would be interesting at best. I will say this. Super Deck as a whole feels like it was intended for children. The simple rules, the bare-looking cards, the fact that it all boils down to a bunch of numbers and basic math problems at the end. I can see this being a tool to teach children how to math, but I'm sure there are better CCGs out there, especially nowadays, that can do this more effectively. Wait, this game is intended for ages 12 and up? I find that very hard to believe. This is more for ages -1 to -0.5. And I'm pretty sure even a fetus would say that this isn't good. Broken gameplay, bad-looking cards, and the competition meant that Super Deck was not long for this world. And, as I mentioned earlier, after the release of the Slim Decks expansion in 1995, no more was heard about Super Deck. So, if you've gotten to this part of the video and somehow want to buy some of these cards, don't. Because I seem to have bought the only 2 eBay listings I could find related to this game. You're more likely to come across deck boxes featuring anime girls than anything related to Super Deck. They were cheap, to be fair, costing around $10 to $11 per pack, and I couldn't find any singles, probably because the majority of people who bought this back then have long since pitched their super decks into the nearest garbage bin. There may be other online sellers, talking outside of eBay here, that happen to have some of these cards for sale, but I didn't bother to check. I believe I mentioned this in my Galactic Empires video. A lot of these older games don't have much demand, thus their cheapness. Even at $10 per pack, I have to say that I really only bought these out of sheer curiosity. Because, like I said, the world of TCGs in 1994 was basically the Wild West, and Magic was the sheriff. Super Deck is the equivalent of going into this Wild West, finding a cave, and then noticing that it is inhabited by a group of bandits who steal your money and give you nameless pieces of paper in return. These nameless pieces of paper happen to be one-way tickets to Host Town because, at the end of the day, there really is no value in anything related to this game. I will give credit for one thing though. The people behind this game were trying to do something good, but it came out of the oven too early. Looking at it is bad enough, but if you've ever played it, I feel for you. I really do. Even trying to play against myself, I could tell that this game isn't good. No, how about nowhere even remotely close to being good? And unless you're a weirdo like me who enjoys collecting this stuff, don't. Just don't. Stay well away from this game, especially now that I've told you all that I can about it. And if you do choose to dive into this, forget the rules and make up your own. It'll be better that way, I guarantee it. So, what happened to Mark Miller after Super Deck? The good news is that Super Deck didn't quite ruin his career. In fact, he did go on to do good things again, starting a new company called Far Future Enterprises in 1996 and getting rights to several of his RPGs, like Traveler. He then helped form another company, Imperium Games, and he also worked on a new edition of Traveler. In the end, I guess you could consider Super Deck a bad blip on what is otherwise a stellar career. Hey, everybody's got to have one at some point. And that's really all I have to say about Super Deck. Thanks for watching. I'll definitely be working on more videos like this, and as always, I hope to see you again soon.